For about $200, you could walk into a Sears and buy a General Electric dehumidifier, or into a Home Depot and buy a Frigidaire, or into a Menards and buy a Danby. 3 trusted names, 3 different aisles, 3 different price tags. Every one of them came off the same assembly line in southern China, and every one of them could overheat, smoke, and catch fire in a basement while the house slept above it. In September of 2013, the Consumer Product Safety Commission announced the recall of about 2.2 million dehumidifiers built by a single manufacturer. 12 brand names were on that list. This video names the 7 that most American homeowners would actually recognize. And it explains how the company behind all of them became the defendant in the first criminal case of its kind in the history of American consumer safety law. The company is Gree Electric Appliances of Zhuhai, and unless you follow the appliance industry closely, you have almost certainly never heard the name. That is not an accident. That is the business model. Gree was founded in 1991 in Zhuhai in Guangdong Province, and it grew into one of the largest air conditioning manufacturers on Earth, building tens of millions of units a year. But in the United States, Gree rarely sold anything under its own name. It sold under yours. Here is how that works, and it is the single most important thing to understand about the appliance aisle. Sears never built a Kenmore dehumidifier. Kenmore is a badge, and it always was. General Electric has for years licensed its name on small appliances to outside manufacturers rather than building them itself. Frigidaire is a brand controlled by the Swedish company Electrolux. Danby is a Canadian marketing company. None of those companies were bending sheet metal. What they did instead was hire what the industry calls an original design manufacturer, a factory that engineers the machine, builds the machine, and then prints whatever name the customer wants across the front panel. 1 chassis, 1 compressor, 1 plastic housing, a dozen different badges going out the door to a dozen different retailers at a dozen different price points with a dozen different warranty cards and a dozen different customer service numbers. Which means when something goes wrong inside that machine, it does not go wrong at one brand. It goes wrong at every one of them, at the same time, in millions of American homes. And something went very wrong. The failure was in the plastic. A dehumidifier is an unusual appliance. It runs hot, it runs continuously, it runs unattended, and it runs in the part of the house nobody visits. A refrigerator gets opened 10 times a day. A dehumidifier gets carried down the basement stairs in May and looked at again in October, if it is looked at all. That means the plastic inside is not decoration. It is a containment system. Electrical components fail sometimes. That is expected, and the entire safety standard is built around it. When a component overheats, the housing around it is supposed to resist ignition long enough for the machine to fail quietly instead of catastrophically. The plastic in these units did not meet the flammability standard required for that job, so when a component overheated, the housing that was supposed to smother the heat became fuel for it instead. The machine did not simply fail, it fed the fire. The commission described the hazard in plain language. The dehumidifiers, it said, can overheat, smoke, and catch fire, posing fire and burn hazards to consumers. And these were not obscure machines from the back of a discount catalog. They were sold at Home Depot, at Lowe's, at Sears and Kmart, at Menards and Sam's Club from roughly 2005 through 2013, at prices between about $110 and $400. They were the dehumidifier a homeowner bought after a wet spring. They were a Father's Day gift. They were the thing you plugged in downstairs and then genuinely never thought about again. If this is the kind of thing nobody tells you in the appliance aisle, subscribe, because this is what every video on this channel does. By late November of 2013, when the agency ran a public bulletin on the recall, it reported more than 70 fires and over $2 million in property damage. That was about 10 weeks in. The reports did not stop. As they accumulated over the following years, the running total attributed to these machines climbed toward 450 fires and roughly $19 million in property damage. But the fires were not the scandal. The scandal was the calendar. First, the names. Because the reason this recall was so enormous is that it was not one product line having a bad year. It was one factory wearing a dozen faces. Start with the 7 you would recognize, standing in a store. General Electric, one of the most trusted names in American appliances, licensed onto a machine it did not design and did not build. Kenmore, the Sears house brand that generations of American families bought specifically because they believed it was the safe, conservative, no surprises choice. Frigidaire, an icon of the American kitchen, owned by a Swedish parent and badged onto Chinese production. Danby, the Canadian value brand stacked near the front of the store every spring. DeLonghi, the Italian name most people associate with espresso machines and oil-filled radiators. SoleusAir, a brand tied directly to Gree's own American operation. And Fetters, the old American air conditioning name that had been sitting in window frames in this country since before most buyers were born. Then the 5 most shoppers would not recognize at all. Fellini, Norpol, Premier, Seabreeze, and Super Klima. 12 names, 12 marketing departments, 12 warranty cards, 12 customer service lines that all ended up pointing back at the same place. And here is the part that stings for anyone who paid up. The premium badge did not buy a better machine. A shopper who spent $350 on a name their family had trusted for 50 years, and a shopper who spent $140 on a name they had never seen before, were in many cases buying the same engineering, the same housing, and the same flaw. The extra money bought the logo, the shelf position, and the confidence. It did not buy a different outcome. Now the calendar. Under federal law, a company that learns its product contains a defect that could create a substantial hazard does not get to investigate at its own pace. It is required to report that information to the Consumer Product Safety Commission immediately. The statute contemplates a window measured in days, not seasons. The entire American recall system depends on that single obligation because the government does not have inspectors standing inside foreign factories. It finds out when the company tells it, and no one standing behind a counter at Home Depot or Sears could have caught this either. Retailers do not run flammability tests on the plastic inside the machines they stock. They rely on the certification and on the manufacturer's disclosure, exactly like the customer does. The commission alleged that Gree knew about the defect and the fire hazard and did not report it in a timely way, not for a few weeks. For months, while machines kept shipping to American retailers and the units already sitting in American basements kept running every humid night. In 2016, Gree agreed to pay a civil penalty of $15.45 million to settle those allegations and to build an internal compliance program. It was reported at the time as one of the largest civil penalties the agency had ever obtained, and that is where most people would assume this story ends. A large fine, a closed file, a lesson learned. It gets worse. Because the second allegation was not about paperwork at all, it was about the mark printed on the box. Those dehumidifiers carried the UL mark. That small symbol is one of the quietly load-bearing things in American retail. It is the reason a homeowner can pick up a machine built 10,000 miles away by a company they have never heard of and assume an independent third party has already tested it against a recognized safety standard. Retailers rely on it to decide what to stock. Insurers rely on it. Electrical inspectors rely on it. Almost nobody actually verifies it because the entire point of the system is that you should not have to. The government's position was that Gree sold dehumidifiers bearing that mark while knowing the plastic inside them did not meet the flammability requirement behind it. That is a completely different category of problem. A defect is a failure. A false certification is a statement. One is something that happened to a product. The other is something somebody decided, and eventually the United States government concluded it was not merely a regulatory violation. In 2021, the Department of Justice did something it had never done before in the history of American product safety law. Federal prosecutors resolved a criminal case against Gree entities through a deferred prosecution agreement, with the company agreeing to pay approximately $91 million. The underlying charge involved conspiracy to commit wire fraud, tied to the failure to report the hazardous dehumidifiers. The Justice Department described it as the first criminal enforcement action ever brought for failing to report a hazardous consumer product under the Consumer Product Safety Act. That law had been on the books since 1972. In roughly half a century, no company had ever faced criminal charges for staying quiet. Gree was the first. Prosecutors also charged 2 former executives individually, not only the corporate entity, the people who made the decisions. Now come back to the opening of this video, and to the basement, and to the machine that may still be plugged in down there. Because here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. A recall is not a recall. A recall is an announcement. It only works if the owner hears it, believes it applies to them, and acts on it. Most people do none of those three things. They do not register appliances. They do not read government press releases. They plug in a dehumidifier, and within a week it has become furniture. That is why, 8 years after the original announcement, the Commission had to put the same recall back out to the public. The figure that time was 1.56 million dehumidifiers manufactured by Gree across 42 separate models built between January of 2011 and February of 2014. And the reason for going back out was that the agency had by then logged 688 incidents of overheating and 23 reports of fire in that specific group of models. Those 23 are not part of the 450 from earlier. Those 23 happened after the machines had already been recalled once, which tells you something uncomfortable. The refunds were available, the announcement had been made, the news had run, and the machines were still running too. They are still moving as well. Recalled dehumidifiers turn up at estate sales, at garage sales, on Facebook Marketplace, and on eBay, usually sold in complete good faith by somebody clearing out a parent's house who has no idea what they are holding. Under federal law, selling a recalled product is illegal. Almost nobody selling one has any idea. And there is one more detail that reframes this entire story. In June of 2021, the very same year, the Commission announced the recall of roughly 2 million more dehumidifiers. Different manufacturer, a Chinese company called New Widetech. Same hazard, overheating and fire. They had been sold under about 20 brand names, including Honeywell and Whirlpool, at Lowe's, at Costco, and at Walmart from 2009 through 2017 at prices between $120 and $430. One factory, 20 American names, again. And that is the shape of this category today. A small handful of Chinese manufacturers, names like Midea, Gree, Hisense, and TCL, build the overwhelming majority of dehumidifiers sold in the United States under dozens of American badges. Virtually none of these machines are assembled in this country anymore. So the lesson is not that one Chinese company behaved badly. The lesson is structural. In this category, the name on the front of the machine tells you almost nothing about who engineered it, who built it, or who answers for it when it burns. 4 different brands at 4 different prices can be 4 versions of the same machine carrying the same flaw. What you can do about it takes 90 seconds. Find the label on the back or the side of every dehumidifier in your house. Write down the brand and the model number. Type them into the search box at cpsc.gov. If yours is on the list, unplug it. Do not sell it, do not donate it, and do not hand it down to your kids. 12 names, 1 factory, 0 warning. If this is the kind of thing nobody tells you in the appliance aisle, hit subscribe.